the events around Guy Fawkes occurred in England. So it is a tradition most associated with our colonial past and of course being a British colony for many years up until the period 1974 when Grenada achieved independence. So the tradition itself comes from our British colonial days, and it's not really, there's some things that happened in Grenada in 1885, but the tradition, the base of the tradition itself, it happened in England, right? So I just want to provide the context here for what we're going to talk about today. So that's probably one of the reasons why most people have not heard about the Guy Fawkes tradition, right? So Guy Fawkes is celebrated on November 5th every year. So that's the it's Guy Fawkes Day on November 5th. So November 5th would be next Sunday, and that day would be Guy Fawkes Day. As I said, like in England, for example, that day is recognized, right? In Grenada, there isn't a big recognition of the day, except for the communities that still practice the Guy Fawkes tradition, which is Mount Morris community and of course Morne Jaloux community, right? But Guy Fawkes is British tradition, and it's celebrated on November 5th, and it's associated with the events that occurred many moons ago on November 5th, 1605, right? So we're talking about over 400 years ago. Events would have taken place on November 5th. We're going to talk about that today, right? But the tradition is associated with those events on November 5th, 1605. As I said, there were also events that occurred in 1885, specifically in Grenada, that brings even significance and really localizes the tradition associated with Guy Fawkes in the Grenadian context, right? So who was Guy Fawkes? First and foremost, who was Guy Fawkes? So Guy Fawkes was born in 1570. Again, it is believed there's no official birth records for Guy Fawkes, but it is believed that he was born around the time 1570. Um, he was a Catholic, so many of the conspirators of the Guy Fawkes events were Catholics. Remember the time in England there was the Catholic Church and there was the Protestant Church or the Anglican Church. In Grenada, we know it as the Anglican Church, but it's more formally known as the Protestant Church, and it goes back to many years ago when there was a breakaway from the Catholic Church because the king at the time divorced and wanted to take on a new wife. And in the Catholic tradition, right, you could only be married once, right? Marrying twice is not part of the Catholic tradition, right? So that's where the Anglican Church was started, because the king at the time was wanted a second wife. As simple as that. A whole church was started because the king at the time wanted a second wife, and the Catholic Church did not allow that. Right? So many of the conspirators associated with the events of Guy Fawkes were Catholics. The king at the time, which was King James the First, he was Protestant or Anglican, right? And he was the leader of England at the time in the 1605 when the events associated with Guy Fawkes did occur. So the events are named after the main conspirator, who was Guy Fawkes. He was a Catholic. He worked for many years as in the Spanish military. The Catholic Church had a Spanish military that throughout Europe, providing, military fighting and so forth. So he was basically a soldier in the military. So he did that for many years before returning to England. While he was part of the military, he met several other Catholics who were disgruntled with the king, King James the First at the time, and together, the total amount of them were number of them were 13. 13 conspirators came together to begin to plan a plot to assassinate King James the First, who was, of course, the leader of England and the head of the Protestant church in England at the time. Right, so that was Guy Fawkes. Much isn't known about him himself. I said again, this was something that 400, talking about 400 plus years ago, this gentleman was born, right? So what was the plan? What was the plan that Guy Fawkes and 12 other of his comrades were planning? The plan was essentially to blow up the House of Parliament in London at the time. So they put together a plan to use gunpowder to set gunpowder alight, um, and blow up the House of Parliament in London. That was the plan. The gunpowder itself was stored. There were barrels of gunpowder stored in the cellar of the House of Parliament in London, and that was their plan. Simple as that, to blow up the House of Parliament. But they were unsuccessful. They were unsuccessful in that plan, and they were mainly unsuccessful because there was a leak. Someone wrote a letter to the king. So an anonymous letter was sent to the king informing him that there was this plan to blow up the House of Parliament and kill him. So that that led to a search and find, and they found Guy Fawkes hiding in the cellar of the House of Parliament, and he had with him matches, 36 barrels of gunpowder, and a lamp. He was hiding in the cellar because he was the one that was going to set the gunpowder alight and, of course, blow up the House of Parliament. So that essentially is the Guy Fawkes story, right? There was a plan to kill the king. The attempt was unsuccessful, and Guy Fawkes was caught in the cellar, and he was sentenced to death, and he was executed on January 31st, 1606. Right, so he was executed for his plan to kill the king and to blow up the House of Parliament, and several of the other conspirators as well was also killed, um, executed rather. After the plot was ended and was revealed and so forth, the King James at the time was very in a celebration mode because he had escaped death, he had escaped this plot to kill him, and he marked November 5th as the official day of Thanksgiving in England, and that's the day today, November 5th. That is Guy Fawkes Day, and is a day of Thanksgiving in England, right? So it was in January 1606 that King James designated November 5th as an official day of Thanksgiving in England to celebrate his deliverance from danger and his escape from death, essentially. The tradition today involves family and friends coming together. There is typically a church service held in England, of course. There is bonfire lighting and fireworks. So that's the tradition, as I said. It's a British tradition associated with our British colonial past. Of course, Grenada is a British colony, as many of the Eastern Caribbean countries are British or were British colonies. So we're going to take a break. and then we're gonna come back to talk about, well, what where Grenada come in this, right? Because I'm sure many people wondering, like, where is Grenada in this, right? This is a something that occurred in Britain, and so what's the significance here for us in Grenada? So we're gonna come back to that. Let's take a break, and we'll be back to share more on that. Right, so we're back. So thank you for continuing to stay tuned to the program today. Today we're talking, of course, the Guy Fawkes tradition in Grenada. November 5th is Guy Fawkes Day. And as I said, it's celebrated in a few communities in Grenada, in the St. George's Parish to be exact. So the community of Morris, there were some events planned for today, but I think due to the weather, they were postponed. And there's some activities that will take place next Sunday at Morris Community Center and Grounds to commemorate the Guy Fawkes tradition. Right, it has also happened in the past in 2019 and 2018. There's also been events in the community of Morne Jaloux to celebrate the Guy Fawkes tradition too as well. So I've provided you with a bit of history of where the Guy Fawkes tradition originated, where it came from, where it was all started, and now we want to bring it home to, okay, this happened in England at the time. It was 400 plus years ago. Um, how what's the significance of it in Grenada? So that's what we want to get into right now. Of course, if you know more than me, leave a comment. Right. So, being a British colony as Grenada was right up until we achieved as first associated statehood in 1967, which was the pre-step before independence of 1974, we continue to honor British traditions. So, in Grenada, we kept the Guy Fawkes tradition, being a British colony, and because we were still being ruled, we had a governor at the time, several governors, and the Queen of England was ultimately our head. Being a British colony, we kept the British traditions. So yes, within the Grenadian context, the Guy Fawkes tradition was practiced as we remained a British colony. But where did the Guy Fawkes tradition really became an issue was in the year 1885. So in 1885, uh, there was this Bonfire Act. So the Bonfire Act basically was passed, and it basically what it did was to prohibit the lighting of bonfires, right? We take for granted that bonfires, we light bonfires on the beach, um we light bonfires in communities to celebrate different occasions, right? But in 1885, the Bonfire Act prohibited the lighting of bonfires in Grenada. Of course, we had the Gazette. So the Gazette has been a long established communication channel to where you share information about acts that have ACTS acts that have passed, right? So The Bonfire Act was printed in the Grenada Gazette at the time, the Grenada Gazette of 1885, saying that there was this act that was not prohibiting bonfires. Bonfires is one of the traditions associated with Guy Fawkes. So there is typically fireworks, a church service, and there is bonfires. You light bonfires because in 1605, when the king declared it a holiday, there was burning of in London, burning bonfires was started in the streets. So that's where the bonfire tradition associated began basically. So bonfires is an expected part of the Guy Fawkes tradition. But in 1885, bonfires were banned. So within the market square of St. George's, riots broke out. There were 5 riots that broke out because the Bonfire Act was basically preventing the normal traditions associated with celebration or commemorating Guy Fawkes Day on November 5th, 1885. So riots broke out. There were damages to nearby buildings close to the market square of St. George's, and it's documented. There was this riots, and from then on, Guy Fawkes tradition basically changed. Right, it changed and it became more secluded to just specific communities who maintain the Guy Fawkes traditions. As I mentioned, the community of Montmaris, also Morne Jaloux, still do Guy Fawkes, but it was not as national as it would have been before the period 1885. Um, so that's where the Grenada part of the story comes into play in 1885, right? So that's the Grenada aspect of it. Before, as I said, it was a British tradition. We kept it being a British colony, but in 1885 there was this change to how we celebrated it because of the Bonfire Act, and that change going forward, how it is celebrated today. So usually on November 5th, there'll be a church service. So typically there's a church service. There is bonfires, and there is the burning of effigies. So the effigy is like a fake, pot, fake, fake and say statute is not the right word, but a fake yes, statute of like the Pope, right? So that's also part of the tradition associated with Guy Fawkes. As I said, it's very secluded to just a few communities in Grenada, right? And not much has been shared about what exactly is the tradition and where it stems from. Right, so that is what I wanted to educate the viewers of the program here today on the Guy Fawkes tradition. Um, those of you who are more interested in what exactly they do on November 5th, you can check out the Facebook page of the Montmaris Community Organization, and stay tuned to the events that they'll be having next week Sunday in Montmaris as they celebrate the Guy Fawkes tradition. Right, you could also look on YouTube. There's a couple videos on YouTube that shows a little bit of the tradition from a couple years back, um, from Morne Jaloux, back in 2019, I believe. Right, so if you want to learn more about the Guy Fawkes tradition. Okay, so we're going to take another break here, and then we'll be right back to wrap up our program today.